Welcome, everyone, to today's panel. So pleased that you are all here. This is the Digital Data for Gender Equality panel, The Next Generation. We have some incredible speakers and leaders who are coming from academia, government, and the private sector, and I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. Really encourage everyone who's watching to utilize the chat platform and put your Q&A in there. We'll be having a Q&A session at the end of today's segment. First and foremost, I want to thank our co-hosts, the GovLab at New York University, who are longtime partners of TA2.08, the organization I'm privileged to lead. And we are really so grateful for the partnership they have shown since starting to form this panel and this conversation back when the World Data Forum was first supposed to happen. And that's only really given a chance for even more exciting work to develop and more insights to develop as well that we are really looking forward to sharing with all of you today. So I'm going to first just introduce all of the presenters and speakers that we have on today's panel. We have Bapu Vaitla, who is a Big Data Fellow at TA2.08. We have Andrew Young, who is Knowledge Director at the GovLab, our co-host. And our panelists are Gloria Akoto-Bamfo, who's Principal Statistician with the Ghana Statistical Service, Paul Koh, who's Head of Economic Graph Policy Research at LinkedIn, Rosita Najmi, Head of Global Social Innovation at PayPal, and Jihad Zahir, Assistant Professor at Qadi Ayad University in Morocco. So first, I'm going to just get us to launch right in, and we're going to start with my colleague Bapu, who will give a 5-minute presentation on the cumulative work that TA2.08 has done on big data and gender. Over to you, Bapu.
Thanks, Emily. I'll share my screen right now, and I'll give a quick overview on how TA2.08 sees big gender data and at least one exciting example of big gender data in action, how that might be clearly relevant for policy. Can everyone see my screen okay? Great. So the first question is, what do we mean when we say big data? And for TA2.08, we are aware that the data science community continues to debate the topic, and it's an important debate. We use a very practical, functional definition. We see it as a form of digital data that's characterized by its resolutions, very high resolution in space and across time. When we use this kind of data, this high resolution data in concert with traditional forms of data, it allows us to respond effectively to situations that require really high resolution geographical targeting or fast moving situations. And we've seen over the past year and a half how quickly policymakers have to respond to changing conditions in situations like pandemics or economic shocks or natural disasters. As I mentioned, we've seen that the pandemic, for example, affects different groups differently. And so instead of deploying a one-size-fits-all policy, we can target particular groups. Here's one example of big gender data in action that TA2.08 funded a couple of years ago. It's an analysis done by Girija Borker, who's now at the World Bank. Previously, she was at Brown University when she did this for her PhD research. And she looked at the relationship between street harassment and educational choices in New Delhi, India. So where she started was one form of digital data, which were crowdsourced incident records. So incidents where women reported street harassment. And the map that you see on the left is of New Delhi and kind of a point-by-point record of where incidents happen. So the safety landscape is worst where you see the red and relatively better where you see the green. Then what she did is a geospatial analysis combining different data sets, including Google Maps, including transit routes, et cetera. I won't get into details here, but the idea is that she converted that kind of point-by-point safety incident map into a very high resolution continuous surface of what Delhi's safety looks like. And then it might be a little hard to see on your screen, but then what she did is she looked at the various ways in which students could travel to their educational institutions and looked at how their routes had to traverse safety landscapes and, in fact, how they might have compromised their choice of the quality of the institution because they wanted to protect their safety. So here's an example where various forms of big gender data, in combination with some conventional data, in fact, looking at the quality of educational institutions, et cetera, led to a better understanding of street harassment and educational choices. So there, over the last 7 years, Data2X has looked at the potential of big data, and we've seen that it offers unique insights into the lives of women and girls. We have a view into certain aspects of the lives of women and girls that conventional data, traditional data doesn't afford. Part of this benefit comes from the fact that a great deal of digital data is already sex disaggregated and already available at the individual level, and cell phone data is an example of that. Now, this data has to be anonymized and made secure, but it's unique in the sense that many traditional data sets are already aggregated at the household level or higher, which doesn't allow this kind of look into sex disaggregated information. It also, because so much of our lives right now are led online or through the intermediary of some digital device, all these passive traces of behavior are coming from technologies and giving us a very detailed portrait of economic and social life. We've also found that gender-sensitive big data is ready to scale. Many sources like cell phone data are already at scale, like social media data, like internet data. We do note that traditional data is always needed for validation, interpretation, context setting. And when we speak about this combination of big data and traditional data, we find that certain topics like mobility, like mental health, physical health, like social norms and cultural change are increasingly well studied. The methodologies are well developed. There are gaps in other topics, some of them economic opportunity, certain forms of gender-based violence, especially domestic violence, political and civic participation. There's some progress on how to study these using big data, but gaps do remain. And as we've seen, even with conventional data, COVID-19 and the global recession is leading to groundbreaking research. And it's, in terms of big data, it's particularly exciting because we've seen the need for high resolution information for policymaking. We do see, however, that there are obstacles in the way of using big gender data for policymaking. One is the fact that often big data sets have gender bias embedded in them, and that's partially because access to technology is gendered. The algorithms used to analyze the data can be biased. And within institutions that have the job of correcting for this bias, there might be a lack of representation across gender and this ensuing cultural bias. So the bottom line is sort of that gender representative samples reform within institutions is still a challenge, but some progress is being seen. There are, of course, the privacy and security issues that are in the newspapers every day. We also know that there are specific risks that might pertain to women and girls, but we've seen also some development in safe data sharing, and that's exciting. Researchers are finding ways to reuse data from public agencies, but also large private companies safely. And that private data is very useful for policymaking. This, of course, brings up the question, though, of who owns the data, who has power over the data. And the last message I'll say is that representation is absolutely critical. We've seen that technologies in the past have exacerbated inequalities. So the final message is that women and girls need to be central to the governance of data, avoiding the past failures that we've seen, and really confronting this question of who has the power, how do we challenge power inequality, how do we illuminate context? So I'll stop there and pass it back to Emily.
Thank you, Bapu, for that really great overview in, less than 10 minutes on what we've learned about both the promise and, as you say, the peril of big data, but overall, really the opportunity that I think it can offer for gender analysis and for closing gender data gaps. I'm really looking forward to hearing some commentary from Gloria. And Gloria, Bapu gave some cool examples, I think, of some country-specific examples, really, of how big data can drive unique insights. You've also been undertaking work at the country level, but from the perspective of a government practitioner. So I'd love to hear more about, based on your experience, how combining big data with traditional data from national statistical offices can allow governments to be more responsive to the needs of women and girls and other marginalized communities. Over to you, Gloria.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. And I must say I'm delighted to be part of this discussion. Here over in Ghana Statistical Service, we've embarked on a project, and I would like to share some insights with you this afternoon. So to begin with, somewhere last year, the Ghana Statistical Service, together with the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection, the Women's Ministry here, the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development, together with the GIS, that's the German International Corporation that we're working with. Together, we piloted the use of citizen-generated data to collect information on gender-based violence. And as we all know, GBV is an area where traditional sources fall short for evidence-informed planning of local services, because either these events they are infrequent, or they are aggregated at too high a level. For instance, demographic and health survey, it's aggregated at the national and the regional level. Or again, GBV suffered the particular phenomenon of underreporting due to reluctance to report to the police for a variety of reasons. So what did we seek to do? Through a design thinking co-creation process, a mobile-based solution, which we named Let's Talk Ghana, was developed for both smartphones and basic phones. So by using this kind of mobile-based CGD, that is the citizen-generated data solution, we were able to hear directly and anonymously from survivors on their experiences. And this channel of timely and hyperlocal data collection, it enabled us to explore and report upon a more truer magnitude of gender-based violence in these 3 pilot districts. Yes, I forgot to say we piloted in 3 districts in Ghana. So afterwards, when we compare the administrative records from the Ghana Police Service, they have a unit called the Domestic Violence and Victim Support Unit. When we compare their data over the previous 12 months period, we saw that the CGD incidence of reporting 3 times greater in the rural areas, and a similar level of reporting was also observed at the urban areas as well. So again, over here, whilst census and surveys form a backbone here in our national statistical system, we really think there's a role that big data, and for that matter, admin data, can play in offering a comprehensive understanding of gender-based violence and other gender-related issues. So from this point onwards, next year we extend to expand this initiative, because the pilot with it really gave us some good results and it was successful. So we plan to roll it out in 30 districts to learn more about where and how the citizen-generated data approach can complement data sources. Also, in the pipeline, we are looking forward to scale up the CGD approach to work with persons with disability, the PWDs. And we are hoping to create, over here in Ghana, there's a component for people with the PWDs. It's 3% of the common fund. And over the years, this fund, the spending and all that, we don't really know what goes into it. So we want to use this platform allocated to PWDs by using the design thinking process, to go down to their level and hear what they also have to say. these people are marginalized, and this will give them the chance to also voice out their worries and what they want to say out there. Another initiative that we are also now embarking on is under the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research, the SIGA Innovation. It's a grant who is in a partnership with the International Center for Tropic Agri, that is CIAT, and Dalberg Insights, and MTN, a mobile network operator in Ghana here. We are seeking to explore the methodological feasibility of training in the machine learning algorithm to infer gender participation in the labor force amongst other indicators from core detail records. And the project will be delivered over the coming 18 months. So we're still preparing towards it. And if this is successful, it could produce gender labor participation indicators in a higher frequency and disaggregations than previously possible. So I'd like to end here and maybe come back later, but this is what we've managed to use big data to come out with some policies, to inform policies over here in Ghana and through the Ghana Statistical Service. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. That's tremendously exciting on all counts. And I hope too that, not only there are lots of questions in the chat for you, but also that we can continue this conversation in other ways as well. It's really tremendously exciting. And I love the connection and the partnership with other parts of government to ensure the data is utilized for policy and for citizen engagement. It's really exciting. I'm going to turn to a longtime partner and friend of ours at Data2X, Jihad here, who's done a lot of really exciting work over the years. But I wanted to talk to you about specifically how your work on big data and gender has evolved in response to the pandemic, and how your research in the era of COVID-19 has further demonstrated the potential that big data has for gender equality insights. Over to you.
Thank you very much. So the main activity that was directly linked to gender was the development of Najatbot, which is an Arabic-speaking chatbot that was created to orient or to provide information on GBV response services to women who need it. We all know that during the lockdown, there was a rise on domestic violence due to stressful economic and social conditions. And this is something I could clearly see from my Facebook news feed. There were so many posts from women asking for help or sharing their own experience with domestic violence. And this was especially common within the groups, closed groups of women in Facebook. For sure, there was tremendous efforts. I mean, civil society and government departments spared no efforts in putting into place actions and measures to counter this increased violence. But it seemed that nobody knew about it. The information was available on the web, but you needed again to know how to search it, how to find it, and where to find it. There was an interesting initiative from CSOs. They published a list of emergency numbers on a website called tenmia.ma. However, the average Moroccan woman wouldn't visit this type of websites. You need to be someone who is really involved in social action to even know about the existence of this website. So I thought to myself, I needed to do something to make sure that this valuable kind of information is accessed by people who actually need it through a platform that is used almost daily, but by almost everybody. And this is how I decided to create Najatbot. So I started by looking for or gathering every single information I could find on the web. I organized everything by city and by service type. It helped me create a knowledge base that served to develop a chatbot, Najatbot, which is, as I said, it's a Facebook Messenger chatbot that provides information on GBV response services through conversation in Moroccan dialect. It was very important that we develop it using the Moroccan dialect to make it accessible to a wide range of women. So the bot got live on, it was live in May 2020. It was a personal initiative, so I didn't have a communication plan or a dissemination plan. I was just sharing the link informally within the groups. Whenever I saw some women asking for help, I'll share the link, and I was happy to see women interacting with it. But in October 2020, I was contacted by UNFM, which is the National Union of Moroccan Women. So it's an organization that is chaired by Princess Lala Mariam. They were interested by the initiative and wanted to adopt Najat Bot. So Najat Bot became their property since December 2020. And the current version has significantly changed to align with their vision. Primarily, I designed the bot to orient women to the nearest service, depending on their geographic location. They wanted to be more centralized at the national level. There were different technological choices, but the most important thing is that Najat Bot is now institutionalized. It is being used by more and more women, and I think it was a very interesting experience. And if there is something if there is a lesson that I've learned is, chatbots are now kind of a revolution in customer relations. We demonstrated that we could actually use them also to improve access to information related to GBV response. And I think that it also provides other advantages. One of them, the information is available 24/7, so it's there, it's accessible by everybody. You can also optimize human resources, leaving it to machines to handle standard inquiries and frequently asked questions, and reserving human efforts and expertise to deal with more complex situations. And the other advantage is the data production, because data is produced from the interactions between users and the chatbots, and I see it as a very, very interesting opportunity to produce data on gender and on gender-based violence. So this is very briefly our experience with Najat, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jihad. I'm sure that there will be. And it's really thrilling to hear that all of the work and the research and the leadership that you've done over the years and these kind of entrepreneurial ideas are being taken up and scaled up, hopefully for the benefit of many. So thank you for that. I'm going to turn now to our colleague and our co-host, Andrew Young from GovLab. We've been hearing a lot about partnerships and collaborations, and GovLab has really pioneered so much work around data collaboratives. And so we're going to turn to hear from him. He has many identities, but also a new identity as a new father. And I just want to put it on record that I am all for parental leave. And yet we appreciate you being here with us today to share the great work that you all do. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Emily. And yes, the parental leave is coming in a few months, so don't worry, we're just staggering. So I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully you can see that. And very briefly, because I want to make sure that we get to the second half of the panel here, but I wanted to share a bit about our work in the GovLab data program to advance more systematic, sustainable, and responsible reuse of data and cross-sector data collaboration to support the public interest. So in the next few moments, I'll share 3 takeaways from across our data program work and vis-a-vis several collaborations with TA2.08 to support more equitable, gender-inclusive reuse of data in various contexts. So if I can advance my slide. First, while much of the discussion around data and gender rightly focuses on establishing pathways for more and better disaggregation of big data sets, we argue that data collaboration tends to be most effective when it's purpose-driven and organized around answering one or more central organizing questions. And through the 100 Questions Initiative, GovLab and partners have convened hundreds of data science and domain area experts to identify the questions that, if answered through data and data collaboration, could have significant public impact. And in partnership with TA2.08, we facilitated this type of expert sourcing campaign for gender questions, identifying 10 that could inform more demand-driven rather than supply-driven data collaboration and reuse to improve gender outcomes. And some of the most supported questions that came out of that initiative, which also involved a public voting campaign and prioritization effort, were questions around things like, what are the gender gaps in ICT access and skills in developed and developing countries? And how do these gaps impact women's economic and social empowerment? What enables and predicts decision-making that meaningfully promotes gender equality laws and policies? How can economic systems account for women's disproportionate participation in unpaid domestic work, among several others? And we also deepen these questions with more information about how we could work toward answers to those questions if we brought the right stakeholders to the table. So on that front, we're now working to identify the data sets, the types of expertise, the types of capacity that exist across sectors that could be brought to bear to help answer these key questions, as opposed to focusing primarily on what data sets happen to be at hand or easily accessible. Second, while broadly applicable good principles and practices are beginning to take shape, data reuse, data collaboration, data stewardship can all be highly context-specific undertakings. And recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to systematic, sustainable, and responsible data reuse and data stewardship, it can be really key in effectively identifying opportunities, sensitivities, risks, and additional duties of care that might be necessary for certain types of data handling or types of initiatives that involve data use or reuse. And at the GovLab, we've developed tools and platforms to support the kind of upfront context-specific identification of risks and opportunities that might help to get responsible data handling practices. And we're always very careful to define data responsibility as a responsibility to avoid misuse of data, but also a responsibility to avoid misuse of data that, if leveraged effectively, could actually improve public outcomes, and in this case, improve gender outcomes in different contexts. So here on the screen, you can see a platform that we developed called the Data Responsibility Journey Tool, which is an assessment tool that takes the user across the data lifecycle to identify a series of opportunities and risks that might need some type of response or strategy to address them, as well as a lot of ongoing work with UNICEF on how stakeholders that handle children's data for and about children, can be more responsible in their handling practices, and what are the types of diagnostic processes that could be put in place upfront to help in the planning process and avoid any unintended consequences or misuse of data downstream. And then finally, we believe that the field would really benefit from developing and testing new ways of connecting the supply of data and expertise across society with the demand for it among those working to improve the public interest, and in this case, especially improving gender outcomes. And we've done some work with partners at the International Organization of Migration and European Commission, among others, to begin testing a new studio methodology, as we call it, which convenes stakeholders among supply side, demand side, and intermediary organizations to rapidly co-design and prototype data collaboratives using a new studio canvas you can see on the screen here, which is all toward operationalizing strategies for unlocking the public value of data held across sectors and derive answers to key questions that we use as an organizing type of framework. And we had our first studio a few weeks back, focusing on migration flows in West Africa, including a lot of discussion around how can we have the type of gender disaggregated information on those migration flows to improve decision-making and governance in different contexts. So happy to talk through more of this, but I think my 5 minutes is up, so I will pause there, and back to you, Emily.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm sure we could benefit from much more time, really from all of you. But I'm quite pleased to turn to Paul Coe from LinkedIn. We've heard a lot about data collaboration just now from Andrew and from others as well. But I would like to see if you could tell us more about your work at LinkedIn. Economic Graph, which I know you work on, is just one example. But could you just tell us a bit more about the work that you're doing, particularly during the pandemic, and what implications it might have for advancing gender equality and informing policy responses?
Absolutely. So thank you for having me here, Emily, Andrew. Data and gender equity is a topic that we're very passionate about at LinkedIn. It's very much a high priority for us. For those of you not familiar with LinkedIn, LinkedIn is an online professional network, and we're essentially the largest, world's largest professional network. We have almost 800 million members that come to LinkedIn and establish public professional profiles. And the LinkedIn profile is essentially your public resume, your public CV. It allows you to be discovered or discover other people. And all of this happens on a real-time basis. So individuals can come to LinkedIn and actually update their profile in real time as soon as they start a new job, as soon as they form new connections as well. And all of this information allows us to see real-time trends into the economy. So when we see things, we can see trends such as what companies are hiring, what jobs are being hired for, what skills are needed, with much more timeliness and granularity than you would get from conventional sources, such as what you might get from government data as well. And so my team's job is to actually study this economic graph, share our insights, share our data with partners that can actually take action from this. And most of the issues that we look at can be analyzed from a gender lens, such as studying the differences between hiring rates of men and women. Since my team was formed, we've been using big data to study men and women in the workforce. And to give everybody a sense of our work, for many years now, we've been working with the World Economic Forum in their Global Gender Gap Report. And we can, I can share with you some findings that we've discovered in the past couple of years. One key finding for us that we've been able to study is differences in how men and women represent themselves professionally. This is a significant difference as well. On average, women list for the exact same position, women list less skills on their profile. There's a lot less more self-promotion activity associated among men as well. And these key differences make can determine and influence how women are hired into the workforce, how women are also issues in terms of bias and representation as well. These implications are significant. We're talking about systemic bias because of differences in how men and women also represent themselves professionally. Another concerning trend that we've been able to study and look at is how women are not as well represented in cutting edge technology sectors such as AI and hardware. And we see significant drop-offs every step along the way in terms of from the education when they're students to the initial jobs they obtain after they graduate, and to how they rise up in the leadership sector. And so women are less likely to actually work in a lot of these emerging job clusters. So we're talking about leading edge sort of technologies, very high value industries that we do want adequately represented. We do want to make sure that we have an equitable future, especially in regards to these leading edge technologies too. And it's no surprise that women have been historically underrepresented in leadership positions too. Our findings very much confirm that women are underrepresented in all industries too. But we also see that significant gains have been made as well in terms of leadership attainment rates. We've studied this quite extensively as well. Women are less likely to sort of make an ambitious job switch. So oftentimes we've found that there's critical windows of opportunity or timelines. We do find that on average, it takes women less time to actually get up to higher leadership positions, but there's so few of them that this is not adequate representation when it comes to women attaining leadership positions. So it's something that we're keenly aware of. that we do want to be part of the conversation in terms of how we surface the data, make sure this is funded too. And during the pandemic, our ability to actually look at these trends granularly and extremely timely was more important than ever. We found that when the pandemic hit, the share of female hiring dropped so significantly too. And you can actually look at this extremely granularly. The share of older women, the share of women without a four-year degree were hit the hardest too, and have not and those hiring rates have not completely recovered as well. We're talking about real policy implications that could to go to actually bridge some of this. Open schools, open childcare options, increase flexible working opportunities, as well as using the right language to attract women too. Now, this is we also look at this in terms of entrepreneurship. One of the great things about LinkedIn is that we can actually see how new firms are created, either because somebody lists on their profile that they've started a new company, or we've detected that a new company has actually been formed with more employees being added to. And we know rates of female entrepreneurship. We know rates of new companies that are created with female founders too. And we definitely, we love the partnerships. We love the conversation that are happening to encourage this happening in the labor market. So we've been sharing this in various forums too. We publish monthly workforce reports on the economy. We also work very closely with local, state, and national governments too. For example, we were working directly with the New York City Mayor's office in the Recovery Data Partnership to actually look at the different hiring rates. Excuse me. We also share our data with the Development Data Partnership. As Andrew mentioned, data collaboratives are extremely important, and that's how a lot of our private sector colleagues, can most impact and most influentially actually share some of this data too. So this is, for those who are not familiar with the Development Data Partnership, this is a program run out of the World Bank, IMF, IDB, and OECD that allows us to share a lot of information to partners that can really take advantage of this information too. And so this continues to be an issue that my team is very much committed to. So for those of you who are interested in the work that LinkedIn is doing, you can visit our site at economicgraph.linkedin.com. And we publish much of it on this too. And it's definitely something that we have a huge work stream on, and we look forward to being part of that conversation too.
Thank you, Paul. Really, really appreciate you sharing those examples and the experience that you have. I mean, I have to say, kind of listening to what you're sharing, there's a part of it that's quite depressing, but I think we have to choose to look at that as motivating instead, and of the data really illuminating, in very stark relief what the challenges are for equity in the workforce, and how to work together to address them through policy responses and through broader collaborations. I'm really excited to introduce Rosita Najmi from PayPal. Rosita, I wonder if you could speak to some of the, maybe one example that you have within PayPal around data for social good, and particularly how you see opportunities around the gender space for the kind of data that you all have, as well as the kinds of partnerships that you're trying to form. Turn it to you. And I think we lost your video.
Oh. Well, I'll go ahead and get started as I try to troubleshoot on the video side. But thank you, Emily and Andrew. Really grateful for the opportunity to join this conversation. Have learned so much already, and really looking forward to the questions and comments from the participants in just a moment. To illustrate what data collaboratives can make possible, I was going to offer a few examples of how we at PayPal have leveraged our financial crimes capabilities and data to advance SDG 16 on peace, justice, and strong institutions. And we're just going to offer 3 things that we're particularly excited about, learning about, and thinking about. So very briefly, for those of you not familiar with PayPal, PayPal is a fintech, and our mission is to democratize financial services so that people, families, can improve their financial health, and so small businesses and merchants of all sizes can pursue economic opportunity. We've remained at the forefront of digital payment revolution for more than 20 years by leveraging technology to make financial services and commerce more convenient, affordable, and secure. And as a result, our platform is empowering more than 400 million consumers and merchants in more than 200 markets to join and thrive in a global, inclusive economy. Top among the contributors to our current state is that we have one of the most sophisticated private financial crimes units in the world. Our global financial crime and customer protection team is comprised of former public prosecutors, law enforcement agents, and data scientists who are tackling financial crime 24/7. And they're working with regulators and law enforcement all around the world to identify and address threats using all the resources and data that we uniquely have access to from our consumers. So I was going to offer 3 quick examples. One, we partnered with Polaris, a leader in combating human trafficking, and we funded the creation of a financial intelligence unit. And we know how human trafficking is not gender neutral. So we pitched in our financial and subject matter support to leverage intelligence from the US National Human Trafficking Hotline and other sources to interrupt trafficker cash flows and to enable prosecution of financial crimes, including money laundering. It's been an incredible privilege to collaborate with Polaris to find new and innovative ways for anti-money laundering community at large to recognize financial transactions that are red flags for human trafficking. Second example, we funded a 3-year research initiative with Northeastern University Center on Crime and Community Resilience, as well as the University of Chicago's Crime Lab. This project researches the money movement associated with the illegal buying and selling of firearms for the purpose of identifying financial indicators of that activity. We were actually surprised to learn that this type of research had never been undertaken before. And again, what was most exciting was not us getting better at our craft, but the public good opportunity that was created. This work will better enable all financial institutions, not just PayPal, and the law enforcement agencies to identify and to stop illegal firearm trafficking. And finally, most recently, we partnered with the Anti-Defamation League to launch a research effort to better understand how extremists and hate movements in the US are leveraging financial platforms to fund criminal activity. So in terms of looking ahead, what we're really excited about as part of the Generation Equality Forum, one of the commitments that PayPal made to help advance gender equality across the next 5 years has a focus on advancing gender data, and we're thrilled for the opportunity to collaborate with TA2.08 and others on reaching this outcome. Second, what we're learning about is data equity, as Gloria described earlier on, as how Ghana has been thinking about how do we integrate the perspective of people with disabilities in the program and policies they're creating. That's a skill and a craft that we're investing in building among our employees and partners. And finally, in terms of what we're thinking about, we've heard a common word through all of the interventions from all of our experts today, and that's around speed. COVID has taught us a lot about urgency and how the partnerships we all know, that's not a fast thing to develop. And one thing I've been thinking about is what could we learn from the rapid response community about emergency preparedness? For example, as I reflect on COVID responses, as well as climate-related disasters of the past 2 years, it was really clear how important it was to prepare in advance those playbooks, the infrastructure to advance so that data can be leveraged as part of those rapid responses. So what this means for me is we just need to hurry up and put in place both the technology side that will allow that interoperability, that safe sharing and aggregating of data. We need to architect these partnerships across the sources and uses in advance. And we need to have our lawyers work out in advance those legal frameworks that will align with all of our policies and rules around privacy protection. And so just really looking forward to the conversation and grateful for the chance to be a part of it.
Rosita, thank you so much for that. And I only regret that everyone on the platform couldn't see you on video. It was working the whole time. Just to see how, I think we could hear in your voice how passionate, oh, there you are. We could hear in your voice how passionate you are. But I'm grateful for the reflections. And also, I think, it's interesting as we go into the conversation and the Q&A to reflect on the relationship between the need for speed and political will. And, do we all decide that this matters and that we need to use our creativity, our intelligence, our speed, our resources in order to advance this, this issue that's so critical to all of us. So thank you for that. And I'm going to turn to the Q&A that we've been getting on the platform. So the first question I want to ask is actually for you, Gloria, specifically. Others might have views on it as well, but we'll start with Gloria. And the question is, I'm wondering how you're viewing the link between new GBV data collection and policy. So specifically, how does the government plan to use the data and translate it into policies and programs, especially as you expand data collection into new regions?
Yeah. So this CGD process, the first step that we took, the first pilot, came out to be very successful, and it looks like people came out wholeheartedly to give us the data that we really want, because over here we did it in an anonymous way, and like people find it difficult going to report some of these issues. So this platform that we made it very easy for we have to help inform in the decision-making processes. So I don't know if I've been able to answer it clearly.
Gloria, sorry, the video froze for a moment, so I think we missed part of your response. But I think, you know, just to go a bit deeper, I mean, do you think that, you know, you were talking at the beginning of your presentation about some of the stakeholders who are around the table, right? So it was not only the Ghana Statistical Service, but it was also, you know, the ministry as well who is engaged. I mean, how do you think about, when you think about a partnership where you want to not only increase data collection, but also the use of it for policy change or program change, who do you think you need to have around the table in order to have that happen successfully in your context?
In our context, the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection, they are the government institution in charge of gender issues, and the policy, they are the policy related. So they are very key in this kind of work that we are doing. So at any given point in time, anything that has gone to gender, we include them and they are part of it, as well as the local government system within the district, the decentralized system, because these are the key people that needs to be involved in activities for them to inform the policy that it's needed to make the change that we need.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Thanks for that follow-up too. And actually, Gloria, before I let you go, there was also a question, so maybe you could even add it to the chat in the event platform at some point, but there was a question wanting to know more about the citizen-generated data initiative in Ghana. So I don't know if anything about it is published somewhere, if there's a link that you could post there, or you could post it in our panelist chat and we can get it in there, whatever you prefer. But there is some interest in the program and I think folks would like to read more.
We have the final, sorry.
No.
We've not published it yet, so very soon it will be out there. And everything, the processes that we went through are all stated in there. So when it's at the appropriate time, I'll link up with you and maybe we can share it around.
Absolutely. We will be glad to share it far and wide.
Anybody wants,
exciting. It's really exciting work, Gloria. So thank you. And sorry for the tech difficulties in the last couple of minutes. So there was also a question more deeply or going a little bit deeper into GBV specifically. And I wonder, Jihad, as well, you know, since some of your work has focused on this, if we could get your perspective, and we can certainly turn back to Gloria as well if she'd like to comment. But the question was, from my understanding, the underreporting of GBV cases is caused by stigma and fear of repercussion. Is there any way to quantify or identify the causes of the difference between the police reports and the tool reports?
Yes, generally there is the shame. I mean, people are afraid to go to the police and to report. There are so many, there is a social pressure, and this is something we could feel from our research that we've done, mining the web for insights on gender-based violence. So basically what we did is that we collected data from essentially from YouTube and from other social media to see how people, male and female, react to gender-based violence, how they see it, how they see even the fact of going and reporting gender-based violence. And we could, it was clearly, we could clearly see that even when we comment refusing a situation or defending women's rights, we got generally attacked. And we have evidence on that. And so this is, we still need to, even if we encourage women to go and report, etc., but we have to not forget that there is still pressure, social pressure from family, from society, and many women report and then go back to the police station and say, okay, I don't want to pursue this process. So there is a lot of work that is needed to work on this reporting issue.
Thank you, Jihad. Gloria, any further comment?
Our situation is somehow similar to what Jihad has just made. And before we embarked on the main data collection for this project, we did a situational analysis, and it came out clearly why people were not reporting. Basically, the first thing, the stigmatization aspect, and reporting to the police and no action being taken, and it's cumbersome. You go in, come out, and it's all, they don't see any action taken upon it. And so this projects came in the 3 pilot district. We realized people were more than willing to use it as a platform to come out because it was anonymous and nobody could know or see whoever is reporting. And I must say, from our perspective as the statistical agency, we are more concerned about the data that we get to feed into the other policy making and institutions. So I must say it's quite a laudable thing that we hope to scale it up to other places as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. I'm going to shift to, I think I'm going to go to Bapu and Andrew with a question, and then I'm going to go to Paul and Rosita. So one of the questions here is around it's a bit putting you on the spot, but I'm curious what both of you are seeing from your vantage points around how institutions, whether or not institutions are actually expanding data analysis on gender equality. Like, are we really seeing progress there? Or, are we having some conversations about it in these kinds of fora, but we're not actually seeing that reflect in institutions and in collaborations?
I'm happy to jump in first. I think that one of the terms that we were actually discussing before we started the webinar, and that has come up a few times, or the panel, I should say, and has come up a few times in the conversation, is this concept of equity. And I think that we're increasingly seeing that among different institutions as a bit of a guiding concept or principle that people are working toward. And I think that's increasingly well recognized. And I think there is that increasing recognition of the value of more and more purposeful disaggregation of data sets from a gender perspective. Whether that recognition of the importance is completely following through into impactful real world practice, I think is still a bit of it's still to be determined, let's say. So I think that we're working toward things. I think there is an actual real interest in establishing more equitable data use opportunities. But I think that we still have a long ways to go, would be my estimation. I don't know if that is your view on it as well, Bapu.
Yeah, I think there's definitely progress. I do think, though, it's fair to say that the collaborations that exist are often sort of clustered, and there's no overarching system that rationally allocates investment and attention to kind of shared goals, shared priorities. And I think, things like funding cycles change with political cycles, with media cycles, and that makes the creation of durable partnerships and durable data systems difficult. The last point I'd bring up is the one that was on my last slide, which is about representation. I think that, yes, there are great partnerships that are happening among high-level institutions, among sort of professionalized researchers, just the professional say technical class that's and policy class that's studying gender equality. But there isn't an architecture by which women and girls across the world themselves can make their voices heard on how they want their data used, what data gaps they perceive in their own lives, and how they want policymakers to respond to both the gaps and the data that they're generating through their behavior. So I think representation is still a gap, although we are seeing progress, I think, in collaborations.
Thank you both for that. It's really, really helpful and reason to hope and be hopeful as well, even though there's always work still to be done. I'm going to turn to Paul and Rosita. Even though this question was sort of from a policy perspective, which I think your work both touches policy or has aspirations in that area, but one of the audience members made the observation that even when encouraging or analyzing sex disaggregated data, it still seems that policy change is really slow to follow. And I would add in there program change, any policy from any large entity, right? Whether that's government or large organizations. And so the question is there a better way to show best practice policy and the benefits of change to a community? So really by that, I think, well, I'll just, editorialize a little bit of, it goes back to Rosita, what you were saying about speed, right? That part of this, it's slow to happen because the will isn't there. And so the question, I think, is, how can those things be brought closer together? That demand and that need, can that be better demonstrated by these kinds of efforts than it currently is? What are you seeing from your private sector vantage points? Paul, we can start with you and then go to Rosita.
Okay, I guess I'll go ahead and take a start at that. I definitely think that's an interesting observation in terms of the speed, but also how highlighting how some of the data is actually being used as well. Completely agree that I think the speed of policymaking can be quite slow as well. I think in certain instances it is warranted. We're talking about decisions that could potentially influence people's lives very significantly too. So I'm sure policymakers do not take those decisions lightly as well. But also in certain times, such as the pandemic, there is a very urgent need to move quickly, and policymaking that hasn't necessarily kept up with a lot of that. I think also part of this also points to how this data use is actually being surfaced to the public too. I think part of this is actually highlighting, making more transparent the use of data in these cases. And I think it's very difficult to communicate to the public exactly how you're putting together these pieces and actually sharing these insights in a safe way so that you do respect privacy, that you do respect so the sensitivities of actually sharing a lot of this data too. But that sort of transparency of decision making in terms of, where are the different sources of information? How are we piecing together the overall picture? I think the public can really benefit from having access to this information too. But I know that immense challenges of this information also being fragmented too, across many different sources, across many different channels too, where it's difficult to know how one organization is going to use this from another space. Even myself, trying to keep track of everything that's happening in the space too, can be very difficult. So I can imagine for the layperson, it's incredibly difficult to actually keep track of everything that's happening.
Rosita, any reflections on this?
Very much agree with what Paul has shared. I mean, I think that's where these playbooks and the concept of preparedness comes in. I think fundamentally there needs to be this investment of what you know, whether it's in between the crises, you know, thinking about whether it's climate shocks or, you know, in the case of COVID, both health and economic shocks. I think the idea is not to rush the process, because I agree with the wisdom around the rules around privacy and data protection. I think it's more about the approach, right? And, you know, if you put someone who has a veteran EMT or like a veteran disaster response person in charge, how would they design the approach? And I think it would be setting things up in advance so that when you're in these rapid response situations, you're in execution mode, not in setting up the partnership mode. And then what, you know, disaster response, and even, you know, if you think about our children at schools, we run fire drills and now they run all sorts of other drills, right? And so I think it's the same idea in terms of then how do you stress test the system and process that you've developed. So I just think it requires, you know, some new skill sets. I think it certainly requires investments on the funding side, and then certainly investments on the political will side, and that this is a new muscle and a new approach that we almost have to condition for like a marathon, and then update our systems, whether it's on the technology side as well as on the policy and regulatory side.
Thank you for those reflections. And unfortunately, we have come to the end of the time for this session. We have so many awesome thinkers on this panel and not enough time for to hear more from everyone. The chat is still active. I encourage panelists to comment there. I encourage everyone to stay, who's listening to this, to stay active on this topic. I think we heard a lot about very interesting partnerships that are happening among civil society, academia, practitioners, and the private sector. I think we clearly see a need that we have the ability to respond rapidly, that organizations of all size actually have a role to play in this, and that we need to build stronger, better, and more durable partnerships to do that. We have those tools, we need the resources, we need the will, and we need to plan ahead as we work towards a more gender equal future. So thank you so much to our wonderful panelists, to our wonderful audience in Bern. We see you, even though we're not with you, and to all of those, oh, thank you for waving. And to all of those who are online, take care.
Thank you.